嚟到香港亞洲電影節2020 76天嘅放映，咁好似我諗你大家都知道啦，其實我哋今日咧喺放映之後咧，而家咧就會同呢套電影嘅其中一位導演吳皓咧有一個對談嘅，咁啊吳皓就係喺美國嗰邊嘅而家，咁我哋而家應該佢都上咗網㗎啦。Okay, thank you very much for being here for the screening of 76 Days at the Hong Kong Asian Film Festival 2020. We will be talking to one of the film's directors, Wu Hao, in a post-screening question and answer session. So we are going to fix the Zoom, actually because we see that, well, there's for the benefit of the non-Chinese speaking friends in the audience, we'll conduct this post-screening question and answer session in English. And Wu Hao actually, he's based in the US, so we can actually do that in English. Okay, maybe we'll wait a little bit and... Okay. I think you probably know that 76 Days is actually one of the 3 films that we have in the section called Tales from the Epicenter. These 3 films are all about Wuhan, the city of Wuhan. The other 2 being City Dream and Coronation. Okay, and 76 Days, of course, is one of the 3 films in this section. Okay, we'll see whether Director Wu is online. 导演，你听得到我们说话吗？
我听得到，我听得到。
嗨，你好。
你好，你好，你好。
你好，观众我们给吴皓导演一轮掌声好吗 ？Can we give a round of applause to Director Wu？
谢谢大家，谢谢大家，谢谢大家今天来看76天这部电影。
好吧，导演，因为我们的观众里面有一些不说中文的他们不理解中文的观众，我们可以用英文去这一个对话吗
？Of course, of course.
Okay, thank you very much, Director. Okay, maybe they have a lot of questions, but since I have the mic, well, I'll ask the question first. Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about the genesis of this project? How did you actually come to work with Zhen Weixi and also the anonymous reporter for this film, 76 Days?
Yeah, the genesis of the film is actually a very complicated story. So usually as a documentary filmmaker, I focus on character-driven stories. I tend to shy away from very newsy topics because very newsy topic, usually there are a lot of medias have already covering it, right? As a storyteller, I always wonder what more can I bring? But with COVID-19, it's really different. It has become very personal. First of all, originally I was planning to take my kids to go back to Shanghai to spend Chinese New Year with my parents because both my parents have late-stage cancer. I don't know how much time they have left, so I want them to spend as much time with their grandchildren as possible. But then it was canceled the last minute. I canceled the trip for my kids at the last minute because we're supposed to fly on the day of the lockdown in Wuhan. And secondly, when I was in Shanghai, it was the first time I was in sort of like a war zone because the entire city, Shanghai, was shut down. Nobody was walking on the street during Chinese New Year, China's biggest holiday. It was just eerily quiet, and people were anxious. People were angry. People were searching for truth on social media over the entire holiday break. As you're aware of, China shut down even beyond the Chinese New Year holiday, the country. It took a long while before work and school gradually resumed. Thirdly, my grandpa passed away in March, and then that was the time when US-China, there was a lot heavy restriction on air travel, and I was filming COVID in the US, so I wasn't able to visit my grandpa before he passed away. So all of this made COVID-19 very personal topic when in early February, when a US network approached me and asked me if I would be interested, I immediately jumped down. And I reached out to, at that time, I wasn't sure whether I was making a Wuhan COVID film or a global COVID film, because COVID in February was obviously becoming a global phenomenon. I was reaching out to filmmakers in South Korea, in Japan, later in Madrid, and also Italy as well. But for Wuhan, I reached out to over a dozen filmmakers who have been filming on the ground, trying to seek collaboration, first of all. Secondly, trying to understand what kind of footage they have shot. So that's how I found Weishi Chen and Anonymous.
Mhm. So when you first got in touch with Weishi, what kind of footage did he actually offer you? I mean, is it only within the hospital, the Red Cross hospital, or were there other footage as well? And how did you actually decide to focus on one single hospital?
The film consists of footage shot in 4 different hospitals. So Wei Shi was a video reporter with Esquire China. He wasn't sent to cover the lockdown, but once he heard of the lockdown, he just jumped on. He said, I wanted to find out what's going on in Wuhan. So he, through his own personal relationship, he embedded himself with a medical team sent to support a Wuhan hospital from elsewhere in China. So he was filming in one hospital. The other one, Anonymous, who's a photojournalist with a Wuhan publication, he was sent to take photos in the different hospitals in Wuhan. And then he started filming video by himself because he found, photos were sometimes unable to capture what truly was happening on the front line. And so Weishi, I remember the first scene that Weishi sent me, the first footage he sent me was the scene when people were desperately trying to get inside the hospital, banging on the door. I remember when I was watching it on my computer, my jaw was dropping because it was, by early February, we have heard enough story about what's happening in Wuhan. We've seen clips, like little clips on social media about how people were either falling, they were fainting in the hospital, or they were falling sick, right? But then it's really hard to see up close what truly was happening. So watching Weishi's footage was the first time that brought me inside the hospital to feel the sense of danger from everybody involved. And with Anonymous, the first batch of footage he showed me was the opening scene, includes the opening scene where the nurse was running down the hallway. That just made me cry because that was just like so painful to watch. Especially I feel helpless, right? Because my parents are in Shanghai, they were scared. I was in New York, I couldn't help them. So both of the footage really, really moved me. So even though later on, I tried to explore how I could make this film about the emerging global pandemic, even experimented with making a film contrasting New York and Wuhan. For example, like A Tale of Two Cities. But in the end, I just couldn't find any footage, or I couldn't find any collaborator who had access to the type of footage that's as powerful as Weishi and Anonymous was capturing Wuhan. So in the end, I decided just to focus on the Wuhan story.
Mm-hmm. It is also a very humanist story because actually followed the travails, the predicaments or the difficulties of the medical staff and also their patients as well. I think probably one of the most memorable scenes in the film was the grandpa, the old man who keeps on trying to escape, to flee from the hospital. And then at the end, he actually did manage to leave the hospital healthy. So actually, how did you actually structure the documentary from all the footage that you have?
So that's another complicated story. To make it short, I started editing in early April, but by that time, because the US-China relationship got so bad over COVID-19, my two co-directors had stopped collaborating with me. So I started editing without knowing whether I would ever get legal authorization or license to use their footage. But I wanted to start editing to edit out a film to show them my creative intention, because I had never met in person with my collaborator. I found them online through friends' introduction. They didn't trust me. They couldn't trust me where I would take the film, which might bring them in trouble in China. So I started editing with only limits to the footage that I had already shot. I remember in early April, after the Wuhan National Mourning Day, right, when the entire Wuhan was traffic stop, air siren was blaring, everybody was mourning. I remember watching a clip of that online, and so I saw that, I just started crying again, because I was thinking about my own grandpa, my own family, how my friends were so scared in China. And that time I just realized that should be the end of the film, because it's such a cathartic moment. Like after this trauma, so everybody's trying to, put an end to the horror that happened. Try to move on, but can we really move on after that traumatic experience? I guess I feel like at that time, that's such a nice ending, because it's not triumphant necessarily to me. It's actually pretty sad. The entire city had to be locked down to combat a virus. So I know that was the ending. And then at that time, I know I would not want anybody to continue filming. This film is about the lockdown period of Wuhan. But then still the question becomes, how much do I want to tell about these characters? How much do I want to interview them, to have them tell their backstories? And secondly, which character to pick? Because in addition to what's being shown in this film, my collaborator, before they stopped collaborating with me, I had asked them to film whistleblowing doctors, some of the early whistleblowers in Wuhan. And we also filmed the same guy whose father died from COVID after having contracted in the Wuhan hospital. The same guy, Ai Weiwei's coronation included in his film. We actually filmed that same guy. He was still in the government. But so which characters to use for the film? And also what kind of style? Do I want to include news clips to give people more anchoring of what's happening day to day? What are the caseloads in Wuhan? But once I started experimenting, some of the ostensibly more interesting characters, like the whistleblowers and the guy who was still in the government, they were just not compelling visually. And also for a variety of reasons, we didn't very access. For example, like one of the whistleblower doctors, she was interviewed by Wall Street Journal, New York Times, by all the media, right? Her story is not politically sensitive necessarily, but she was really courageous, trying to raise the issues of COVID in the early days. So we would love to include her in the story, but the problem is she was so timid on camera, very shy. And so it's different from print, between print news reporting and film. And then with the other guy who was still in the government in Ai Weiwei's film, we mostly have interviews. So when we cut interviews of one person with other footage where it's mostly just verite, right? Observational, you see the drama, the action. We experimented with that, it just didn't work. The stylistically didn't quite work. And with regard to the social media / news media clips, because what happened, I think people in Hong Kong probably have followed what happened in Wuhan very closely, because in the early first 2 weeks during the lockdown, a lot happened, right? The Red Cross scandal, the firing of the entire provincial government. And it's just really complicated story. And then I just feel like the more I edit this film, the more I feel attached to the detail of the footage. I feel like I want to tell a story that's not being well covered in the news. I don't want to regurgitate what's already being in the news. And lastly, I want to be able to tell a story of hope, especially after the COVID-19 has come to New York. I see similar stories are happening worldwide, the similar human stories. So that's why I decided just to make it small, making the film small, rather than big commentary about the lockdown, about what happened, making it small just about the individual humans' experience, how they're trying to survive this pandemic, trying to help each other survive.
Yeah, it's a very powerful film. I mean, with powerful images about the persistence or the resilience of humanity. Okay, maybe I shouldn't just ask the questions all by myself. I'm sure that the audience here, our friends in the audience, would have questions as well to ask Director Wu. If you want to ask a question, please raise your hand and my colleague will pass you a microphone. Okay, any questions? Okay, don't be shy. Okay, this lady here.
Hi, thank you very much for the film. I wanted to ask if you have a sense of how much access and how much freedom your collaborators were given in terms of moving around the hospital and if they were able to film everything that they wanted to.
Yeah, that's a great question for any documentary filming, right? We always want to get the location and the characters' permission. So during the lockdown, only medical staff, patients, reporters, and state-sanctioned TV crews were allowed inside the hospital. But this restriction was not uniformly applied across the different hospitals because Wuhan is a major healthcare city, so there are a lot of hospitals, or throughout the entire duration of the lockdown. Midway through the lockdown, central government really tightened access to the hospital. They actually sent hundreds of reporters from to cover more positively cover the COVID story coming out of Wuhan. With my two collaborators, they went in because they were reporters. The control of access is at the individual hospital level. So there are certain hospitals I try to ask my collaborator to go in. For example, like Wuhan Central Hospital, where Dr. Li Wenliang, right, contracted COVID and passed away. We just couldn't because there are two or three hospitals, they were like hardest hit by COVID. Nobody could get in unless you have state explicit state approval. With the other hospitals, to varying degrees, it's up to the hospital chief to decide which type of reporters or TV crews will be allowed in, how much freedom they will have. However, since this is during COVID, once you got permission to go in, you can pretty much roam anywhere inside a hospital if you are willing to take the personal risk. For example, there was one scene in the film where my co-director was filming two guys who are about to be released, being interviewed by a crew outside behind a glass window. So the TV crew didn't want to come into the contamination zone. My co-director was able to. So in terms of kind of access, because they could roam free in the hospital, they could basically film anything. Obviously, sometimes the doctor will say, please stop filming. And then my co-directors will stop filming. And whenever they approach a patient, if the patient feels uncomfortable, say, please don't film this or don't use this, they will follow order as well. So the type of access, I think it's just combination of reasons because the chaos in the hospital. But remember, at the beginning of the lockdown, a lot of hospitals ran out of PPEs, right? They wanted media to come in and report what's happening on the front line, so they could get help from the rest of China. So I think it's more complicated, the government's control of access to the hospitals. So luckily, I think the reason I chose to collaborate with these two filmmakers instead of the other ones, some of the other ones were also filming in hospital as well. Number one reason, obviously, is the type of footage they shot. It's so intimate and raw. And secondly is the type of access they could have or the type of hospital's administration they encounter who allow them to have pretty good access.
Okay, but director, did the when the reporters emerged from the hospital with their footage, actually did the authorities had vet the footage that they have before allowing them to bring them into the open?
So with Weixi, no, I mean right now, because this production is not sanctioned by the states, we're not seeking distribution in China, so we don't have to apply for whatever license China requires. No, I mean, basically my co-director, they uploaded footage onto the cloud in China. I download them in the US. I don't, I think right now, a lot of times when we talk about censorship or seeking government approval is usually a film that tries to find distribution in China. And then you basically, it's up to the whims of the Film Bureau, whether they approve the film or not.
Okay, any other questions for the director from the audience? Okay, the gentleman there.
Hello, Director Wu. Thank you for making this film. And my question is that I just wonder, how would you personally position this documentary, or what do you actually think maybe before making this documentary? What do you think of a documentary? And after you are producing this documentary, you see it very personally. And do you see this kind of medium or container of reality differently after you produce this film? Do you think it more of a personally, or do you think it can be some kind of medium that can express certain reality to a wider level and with your own message embedded in it? So just the mainly on how do you see maybe documentary apart from news after the COVID coverage of this? Thank you.
Absolutely. I think some people tend to view documentary as a single genre, right? But then, I mean, in my view, documentary is like nonfiction writing. There are so many subgenres with nonfiction writing, like memoir, historical, nonfiction, and contemporary news reportage. The same with documentaries. So certain documentaries, you see the filmmaker taking more like an investigative journalist role, trying to figure out what happened, right? And there are also personal documentaries. The type of documentary I personally like to watch and like to make, the story that focus on human experience, human drama, human emotion, and try to tell me some more emotional truth beyond what's considered to be factual truth or truth in news media. So for me personally, I like even this film, I think it eventually becomes the type of film I would personally like to make, because through editing, I gradually stripped away the news, right? Any news, any factual elements. I really wanted audience to focus on the emotional and elements of living through this epidemic. So it become like it conforms to my personal style. But if you have watched my previous film, I have a film on Netflix, All in My Family. It's a really personal film. It's like a personal memoir. It's my own, building up quote unquote modern family in the US and take the modern family back to mainland China and confront the cultural divide. That film is personal. And my previous one before that, People's Republic Desire, is about live streaming internet celebrities in China. That's almost like a sci-fi film. But with 76 Days, it's purely observational. There's I wasn't trying to force a narrative or 3-act structure or dramatic arc with the story. So I think as I'm making more and more documentary, my own understanding of what the documentary genre can do, or what type of film, different style it can support, is also evolving. So right now I'm just excited about making more. But overall, I think, to go back to your question, I think overall my personal preference will be, bringing the viewer something additional to what's already covered in the news. That's been my personal mandate.
Okay, Director Wu, actually, because you just said that, well, you've got quite a bit of footage, and also, well, there are other directions that you could have taken this project. So are you going to work on another film, a follow-up to 76 Days, which is also about COVID, but maybe in another manner?
I don't think so. First of all, the reason I didn't include those footage in the film is because I didn't consider them to be strong enough or interesting enough. So also, there are so many other films about COVID coming out into the world, including more films about Wuhan coming out that I'm aware of. So I just don't feel like there's a need for me to make another film about COVID. I mean, there's going to be so many filmmakers contributing their own personal perspective, right, on this global phenomenon.
Okay. I'm sure the audience will have loved to ask more questions, but sadly we've run out of time. But well, thank you very much, Director Wu, for joining us from the US for this question and answer session. Thank you very much. And
thank
yes,
you.
Another round of applause for Director Wu.
Have a good night. 晚安大家。
Okay.
拜拜。
谢謝導演，拜拜。OK，咁 亦都多謝晒各位觀眾嚟睇亞洲電影節嘅76天，多謝晒。